All right, welcome everybody. We're live right now. Very excited to be here with you all. My name is Alex Isaacs. I'm a trainer with Digital Labs, one of Google for Education's official training partners. And within 30 minutes today, I'm going to share with you using Google Gemini to support efficient, personalized student feedback. And we're going to kind of run through the scenario of 120 essays, one teacher, and 0 weekends lost. And obviously, I think back to some of my ELA writing days. I think about some of those grading piles and not having the outlet of AI as a starting point for feedback for our students. So we're hoping that within these 30 minutes that you can take something away in your own personal practice. So as far as today goes, think about 120 essays. For each one, you're finding evidence tied to the rubric, naming a strength, maybe asking a follow-up question. That pattern is repeating itself over and over again. So I really want to kind of encourage everybody out there to start thinking in these menial tasks that happen over and over again, that take up our cognitive load and a lot of our times. How can we kind of adjust and incorporate AI tools like Google Gemini, especially the Education Enterprise Edition, to make our lives a little bit easier and give us that targeted feedback as that, again, starting point where we're the human in the middle, really scrutinizing that feedback and deciding, is this in my voice? And a couple of other criteria that we're going to share with you today. So really, I would love to know if you're watching this as a recording or with us live, which of these four would you say are the ones that might take the most time as far as, within trying to give your feedback to students in a group of essays that you might be kind of leafing through? How would you feel would be the most challenging aspect, the most time-consuming aspect? So again, we're not trying to replace teachers here. We're just really kind of setting the role of Gemini and then our role as well. So what we're defining is the rubric success criteria and the voice and boundaries. Sometimes guardrails are some of the most important aspects to include within prompts that we're sharing with our AI chatbots. Gemini is then going to draft its output for you, hopefully based on some good evidence link comments that you're providing to it. And again, we're going to provide you all different types of examples today, possible patterns, and then revision requests. You can always go back and forth with Gemini and really reiterate what you might need if it didn't quite give you the output that you were looking for. Finally, you decide, is that output, is that feedback as a starting point from Gemini that was drafted, is it accurate? Is it fair? And do I like the voice and the tone that it's being shared before actually pushing that out to my student? And in the case today, when we do an actual demo, it's not going to be a score attached, but we're going to show you some really effective ways of going about doing this. And really, that bottom line is most important. AI is going to accelerate that drafted feedback, but then you're going to be that human in the middle using your best professional judgment, making sure that that targeted feedback is personalized. And as I like to say, you're folding in the soul into that chatbot's response that initially is generated. So as far as some guardrails before uploading student work, you really want to make sure that you're using your school account and that Gemini is enabled and covered by your district policy. So that's really primary and number one, because with the Education Enterprise Edition of Gemini, Google is not using your prompts to train its language model, and no one is reviewing it at Google. So you have that privacy built in as long as you're signing in with your school credentials consistently, and that your school has actually set up the ability to use Gemini in your district. We want to try to minimize and de-identify students as much as possible, even with those enterprise data protections. We only want to use approved systems. But again, we want to do whatever we can to make it where students are not actually being identified within these files and these prompts that we're using. Never outsource the grade. We're using AI to draft feedback, not make final evaluative decisions. That's again where we're the human in the middle. Our feedback, our perspective on the feedback that is generated to us, and our perusal of our essays, especially in the example I'm going to share, which is a paragraph essay, That's still very important. And then checking every claim, verifying quotations, rubric alignment, tone bias, and accommodations. So we're making sure, one thing that I always explain whenever I'm sharing anything on AI is that obviously AI can make mistakes. We have to carefully vet all aspects, all outputs that are created and generated by AI, whether they be images, quick email drafts, or especially when we're giving feedback to students, because they're going to pick up on that as much as AI is kind of inundating them on a daily basis. And we want to make sure that our feedback is being viewed as human and genuine. So again, treating this Gemini feedback as a starting point, not the end game. Now, Digital Labs has kind of developed this aspect of setting a 5-part prompt for more usable feedback, and it includes setting a role for the AI. And in this case, we're going to talk about you're a supportive writing coach. That's kind of how we're going to treat this demo when we get to that point today. You could give it the context. Great idea to kind of get who your audience is. Grade, task, learning goals, student needs. If you wanted to kind of incorporate personal interests of students, if that was appropriate for the type of narrative writing you were doing, you could also do that while remaining, keeping those student actual names de-identified. Criteria, using either a screenshot or cutting and pasting in a rubric. These are all different ways to kind of add that criteria. If we're outside of the writing aspects, and you simply have like a different type of grading source, you can upload that as well. But for the purposes of today, I just have a very simple rubric for a 6th grade paragraph essay. Next, the task, find evidence, draft strengths, and next steps. I think that many of us out there, I'm sure many educators watching this, how are we doing as far as giving students good feedback? Actionable feedback is so important for us that we're actually sharing with them, hey, these are your next steps that you need to take. I also am a former math teacher. I remember when my feedback was less targeted and less specific, my students had a little bit of a tougher time knowing what to do next. And finally, the format, set length, tone, structure, and constraints, or as I like to call them, guardrails. Either way, it doesn't really matter. But if you can include these 5 aspects within your prompt, if we're dealing with something relating to feedback, that would really be an effective way of going about it. Now, here is an example of what we're actually going to pull from in a little bit once we get to the demo, and we're almost there, and we'll give you some hands-on time to work right alongside where we still got a little bit over 20 minutes. But I'm going to keep this up there and kind of read aspects of this so that everybody can kind of see all those different components that we had in the previous slide. So you're a supportive blank, like grade/subject writing coach. So this is where, depending on the attendees that we have right now, this is where you would specify your grade level and your subject if we're dealing with some type of essay or paper that you're having Gemini analyze for you. You could see that then I use the prompt saying, use the attached rubric and student response. Do not assign or change a grade. That is obviously our guardrail. We don't want a grade assigned at all. We're going to be assigning a grade based on the feedback and based on our review of these paragraphs. Now, this is where we get really targeted, and this is where a prompt is kind of worth its weight in gold. And anybody out there watching, feel free to take a screenshot of this really quickly so that you have access to this moving ahead. Identify one specific strength and quote or paraphrase the evidence. Identify one high leverage next step tied to one rubric criterion. Draft a 70 to 100 word comment in my voice, warm, direct, and curious, and end with one revision question the student can act on. Now, here's a very important caveat at the very end. If evidence is missing or unclear, say so. Do not invent quotations. Now, that's very important for us because we do not want the AI manifesting ideas that are not there to try to fulfill some type of aspect of its language model, that prediction that it sometimes gets wrong. And then we just have a quick tip underneath. If you have either a comment bank or you know some of the phrases that you use consistently in your teaching practice when it comes to providing feedback to others on writing, you can actually incorporate those into Gemini and it will keep those in mind for you moving ahead. So, as we talked about before, the first draft is the starting point, not the finish line. The generic draft over on the left side might be something that is generated if we use a less specific prompt as compared to what you saw on the previous slide. But on the right side, that's the teacher-shaped revision. And before I kind of read it out loud and point out some of the different examples, I want everybody out there who's watching to really think about which one of these would be easier to act on from a student perspective, especially a student in your class, maybe a multilingual learner, maybe a student with special needs. I would just love to everybody just kind of scan the slide and just kind of think to yourself, which one of these would be more effective at helping my students hit the ground running? And I don't have to take very long, and I'm sure a lot of you out there are saying it's a very obvious question, but again, this is where we take the AI draft that might be a little generic depending on our prompt, and then we fold in that soul. We bring in ourselves into our feedback before we share it with our students. So your opening clearly states that the school gardens build community, and the lunch table example makes that claim concrete. Next, connect your second example back to the claim with one sentence explaining why it matters. What should the reader understand after seeing both examples together? So that is giving me the connection to the second example back to the claim with one sentence explaining, and that question at the end to make sure that I'm reflecting a little bit on this feedback and making the changes based on what my teacher told me. So it's a very easy way. That scenario that we again talked about, 120 essays in a weekend. I hope that that is not anybody who is watching this entire school year. But what Gemini is going to allow you to do with some simple prompting and caveats that you set up for it with the context and formatting and guardrails is it's going to allow you to kind of move through these with a very quick and efficient workflow. So one conversation can kind of calibrate for you and then move in small batches. And what that means is you want to start by testing 2 or 3 different samples. And the more varied those samples are, the better, because that's going to allow you to see, okay, a student who might be beyond proficiency and a student who might be on level, their feedback that they're receiving is in my voice and it's effective for the way they wrote. So it's going to be very important for you to not overwhelm with saying, like, I'm going to upload all of these at once or do 60 at a time. We really want to kind of upload a batch, recalibrate as needed, and kind of review the feedback as we're going. So the 4 steps: calibrate using 2 to 3 varied examples, adjusting tone, and how the rubric is being interpreted. Then we can draft, process a small batch, ask for a consistent output structure. The easier that we can get into those bullet points, maybe for our students, if that could help them, maybe numbering as needed. If we have multiple bits of feedback, you can change that as needed in the drafting portion. Then we're going to review, verify evidence, equity, and accuracy, and that the feedback that we're getting as that starting point has an instructional fit. And finally, we're going to deliver it. We're actually going to give it back in a feedback system and personalize where it matters most. So it's very important that we're keeping in mind this kind of flow that allows us to give better feedback in a more timely manner while incorporating AI in a way that doesn't take over for the human in the middle. All right, so at this point, we're going to get into a live demo. And if you are out there with the Google for Education or Google Premium account, you are more than welcome to join me right now. Full disclosure for me, I do not have my premium account on right now. This is me purely using my Google Gemini EDU account for my school in New Jersey. So my hope is that if you have access to this, it will be very easy for you to kind of follow along, take some prompts, and put them in on your own end to see the types of outputs that you're getting. So I'm starting a new chat right here. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the rubric that I made up for myself. Now, I suppose that what we can do first is simply go to the plus button and select upload files. If you have it somewhere else, like on Google Drive or something like that, you can select that as well. and I'm going to select this grade 6 writing rubric. And now you could see that this is a very basic rubric right here. Nothing too fancy. Quickly created this in preparation for today's session. And I'm sure many of us, especially writing teachers, have something a little bit more advanced than this, but it's just being used to kind of uh, be our source as far as what type of feedback Gemini is going to produce for us. And now I'm going to kind of paste in certain aspects and steps so that everybody who's watching us around the world can kind of keep pace and then add in these different components as we go along. So first aspect, here's a sample essay from a de-identified student. The topic is, do school gardens build community? Kind of going back to that school gardens aspect. Now, I'm not going to read this brief paragraph that is here, but I'm just showing you that we have nothing identifying the student. We brought in their quick essay. Depending on what level of Google you have, you could do this within Google Classroom as well. But at this point, I've got my students' quick essay pasted in, and I'm ready to continue on along with my source. Now, this is that optional example that is going to allow you to have some better outputs more quickly that sound more like your voice. I'm now going to paste this in. Here are a couple of examples of my feedback and tone. Please match the style of these examples. And you've got a strong claim here, etc. I can tell you know this topic well. Let's make sure the reader can tell too. So kind of keeping it very straightforward and objective. We're making it where it's very direct with the feedback. And we're going to see that just those couple of examples, again, of our actual voice will provide a great reference in addition to that rubric that we have up at the top right now. Now, the next aspect is the actual prompt. And I'm going to drop this in. And this will be the final component that we need before we run it to see the type of output that we have. So this is where I read this on the previous slide when we were in on the slide deck. It has some very specific instructions as far as the format of generating 70 to 100 word comments in my voice, warm, direct, and curious. And we're trying to end with that one revision question. So we're being mindful of all this as we examine our outputs as we go through Google Gemini when we're using it for feedback. So I'm going to submit this. And you'll see that despite really formatting it the best, this is not the most elegant looking prompt right here. No bullet points, no nothing. It's still now generating for me a pretty good synopsis and overall bits of feedback. So you can see that it starts with identifying strengths and next step analysis, including where you do see that it's pulling a quote with the kids who never talk to each other. Now, that's a perfect example for me to now take this response and make sure to go back up into the prompt. And I would now be scanning it for this kids never talk. And now I can see this in the prompt right here. So whenever a quote is brought up, that specifically needs to be verified and made sure that it is a part of your actual student's essay. In addition to that high leverage next step analysis, the student mentions learning about composting, but drops this example without explaining how composting built community. So I'm going to stop on that aspect. And now I'm going to show this feedback comment. And I'll zoom in for everybody so you can more clearly read it. Now, I'll give everybody a moment to kind of read this and think about, would this be the type of feedback that you would share with your students? And something kind of catches my eye a little bit that might make me want to make a slight change. But I'll give everybody a few moments to simply scan the page in front of you, read this feedback comment and actionable revision question, and then we'll pick back up in a few moments. All right, so I really do like the feedback overall, but there's something that's kind of sticking out to me that would be something that I might be a little bit more reticent to share with my students if I was an ELA teacher, especially teaching writing to my kids, but any real content area. And it is the M dash that's near the tomato beds. Now, while it might be appropriate to use that right there, and I'll highlight it right here, that is one of the key signs of AI generated writing. Now, you would have two options here. If you like the rest of the feedback comment and it's just that M dash that is actually kind of throwing you off a little bit, well, that would be easy enough to take this comment, personalize it as needed, and simply turn that into a comma. Very often, these M dashes are very easily replaced by a comma. So this is where you would decide, is there anything beyond that end dash that is kind of throwing me off a little bit? Would that clue my students in on the fact that I'm kind of incorporating AI within my feedback system? And would that be something that would be viewed as something that might be detrimental as far as the way they would respond to your feedback? So you have to ask yourself that. You know your students best, but to me, it would simply be analyzing and scanning this feedback, going back up to the student's quick paragraph essay, and ensuring that all of these different aspects actually match up with the writing. Now, let's say that we didn't like the feedback, and let's say that we wanted to have it where it was more natural, and we wanted to have it where there's no end dashes. So please remove all end dashes. I actually think it's EN dashes. That's been very new to me, and I'm confused by that, but I'm going with it. And make this more of a warm tone. So it doesn't have to end at that first iteration. And now you could see that that is just simply a hyphen for hands-on project. There are no more end dashes. And now there are more exclamation points, really kind of being thrilled to talk about and read about these tomato beds. So you could see that in really very little time, we would have one essay done after kind of taking this, copying it to whichever LMS that we're using, Google Classroom, pasting it into the comment in a doc, any different aspect like that to make sure that we are now bringing it into the mode. We're going to share it with our students and ensuring that we make the necessary edits so that it is in our voice. But what we really wanted to kind of share with you is that workflow of kind of providing the criteria, then sharing the actual essay of your student who hopefully has been de-identified. Be a little bit careful with personal narratives. There are some different aspects that can identify students within those. But again, with that Google Enterprise protections built in, you have a lot available to you there. But just really asking it for that specified format of asking it for that summary of analysis and then providing that actionable revision question so that students now know what to do exactly. And again, having to read this, come up with the full script for feedback off the cuff in those blank spaces, one after another, when we're teaching 3 different sections of 30 students, 90, 120 essays in one shot. The more that we can kind of rely for AI as a starting point, again, not taking us out of the equation, the better. And within less than 7 minutes, quick demo on how you can just simply take these prompts, make sure they're specified, and get these feedback outputs that are very easy to share with your students after bringing in your personalization. So very easy way to go about feedback with Google Gemini, with those hopefully enterprise EDU edition if your district or school allows for that. All right, we're going to go back to our slides. We talked about this just now. Now, again, I could have come back at it and said, hey, show me evidence for all aspects of your claims, but it did that. It actually did provide that italicized quote that did match what we were looking for. So again, the more that you could kind of follow this flow with using Gemini for feedback, the better. Now, again, that quality control, that aspect of us being the human in the middle, this is something that we cannot kind of gloss over in any way, shape, or form because the quality control legitimately only takes about a minute or even less than, depending on how long of an essay we're dealing with. So really 5 quick checks before you send any type of feedback. Evidence, Does every claim match the student's actual work? Again, dealing with teacher reputations in the new age of education, with AI often being incorporated left and right in our day-to-day planning. We have to make sure that what we're sharing with our students actually matches what they're writing. That is crucial. So very important to keep that in mind. Rubric is the next step tied to the intended criterion. Are we actually making it actionable feedback that is based on the assessment tool? And in this case, it was a rubric. Voice, very easy on this one. Would you actually say this to a student? I still remember very vividly, even though I'm a tech coach now, I remember how I would speak to students. And if I was dropping some weird kind of robotic type of response on them while typing on some of their math responses, they'd pick up on that very quickly. So you really have to ask yourself, would you actually say this to a student? Equity, is the tone and rigor consistent across students? So are those outputs that you're doing in batches for these essays, is it consistent regardless, depending on a student's writing level, their vocabulary use, whatever other types of grammatical or errors that they're completing? Is it still picking up on that regardless of the level and consistently across all levels of students? And last but not least, can the student tell exactly what to do next? If the answer is no to any of those five, we need to make sure that we're revising or rejecting the draft. That's a crucial point in today's brief webinar that we've got less than 5 minutes left at this point. So again, any of these criteria are not met, it is a rejection, it is an edit, it is not sharing that feedback with our students. And of course, scores and final comments remain the teacher's responsibility, not Gemini. So really what we're wanting you to do over at Phygital Labs is to, strike while the iron is hot after today's session. I hope I did enough to influence you all out there to say, this is something that I could really at least try if I've got access to this in my district and I'm on that EDU or professional account. So you could start with a single essay, drafting feedback for just one representative response, and then allowing that to be something that can be shared with Gemini to have it adapt to your type of voice and tone and feedback style. You can also create a comment bank, generate adaptable comments for common rubric patterns. So if you want to type out your own comments, that can be uploaded into Gemini to then create new ones for you to add to a document of comments. You could have that as well. And then finally, turn the written feedback into 3 student-facing questions where even if you're not able to get that time with your students with one-on-one conferencing, which we would all love most, you still have 3 student-facing questions for them to be able to reflect on in the writing process. And what we really want you to make you understand is success is not students, it's useful student action, not maximum, hey, I don't have to do this feedback. While that's important with time saving, it's actually the success is measured by students being more able to act on the feedback and getting more out of that feedback. So making sure to set that distinction before we close out today. So your starting point, drafting faster, reviewing carefully, and teaching personally. If we can keep those 3 aspects in mind, we'll be in really good shape. And before we kind of close out today's session, we got less than about a minute left. We really want you to reflect on this. What is one feedback task you will test, and what will you always keep human? I will again reiterate, we are the humans in the middle. We are the individuals who need to make sure that everything is on point in our voice, speaking for ourselves, and we are not replacing our feedback with Google Gemini or any other chatbot. We are making sure that students feel like their work is being reviewed effectively, and we are using this as a starting point. Probably said that about 5 different times at this point, but it's an important one to hammer home, that we are using this feedback as a starting point and then personalizing it for our learners. So last but not least, today we have a QR code available to you right there along with Phygital Labs Linktree link. And if you'd like to subscribe to Phygital Labs to learn more about free events, free resources, they do great monthly types of activities and games and ways to engage your students. Be a great way to kind of stay connected with Phygital Labs and all they're offering Google educators around the globe. So very appreciative of everybody joining us today. I really hope that you can put into practice some of the different aspects that we discussed today, especially some of those prompts that we kept on the screen. Feel free to pause as needed and get those down so that you're ready to go if you're trying to use Google Gemini to provide feedback to your students. So in the meantime, I'm wishing everybody who joined us a wonderful school year. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and hope that you take a chance to try some of these different integrations for using Google Gemini for feedback. But without anything else, I'm wishing everybody a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you again soon at a future Phygital Labs event.